Tune Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @TuneReview, that is @CuenDreview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@tunereview.com, that is INFORMATION@CuenDreview.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday, 19th of April 2023, from the business section. Scottish engineering company Expera lands major appointment. Report by Scott Wright. A rapidly growing mechanical and engineering consultancy has made a major appointment to lead the drive to net zero for its clients. Sarah Peterson has been hired by Expera to head its Edinburgh office and lead its energy and sustainability services across its UK operations. Ms. Peterson joins the company following an 8-year spell as a director with Harley Haddle, the multidisciplinary engineering practice, where she worked on high-profile projects such as the Johnny Walker Whisky tourism attraction in Edinburgh and the expansion of the BAFTA, British Academy of Film and Television Arts, offices in London. Expera has delivered projects worth more than £350 million in the last 2 years and is said to have started 2023 strongly, with appointments such as the £100 million development of the Ocean Terminal shopping destination in Leith. Ms. Peterson, a prominent advocate for women in engineering, who has worked in the sector for 20 years, said, "I am delighted to be joining Expera," which is spelled XBURO. The company ethos is closely aligned with my own approach to design and commitment to provide high quality engineering solutions. As we move towards net zero, our industry faces a period of dynamic and innovative change, with building performance a key driver which I'm excited to drive alongside Expera. Expera was established in 2018 by directors Thomas Brady and Michael Gribben. Mr. Gribben said, "This is a major appointment for Expera. Our drive for success is underpinned by delivering expertise, and there is nobody more qualified than Sarah Peterson to lead the route to net zero and sustainability for our clients. This is at the forefront of our agenda for clients, and, with Sarah on board, our team, our clients and our projects will be expertly led to address the evolving needs of businesses, buildings and the environment." Expera is currently delivering a range of private and public sector projects for several clients such as North Lanarkshire Council, NHS Highland, NHS Lothian, NHS Golden Jubilee and East Renfrewshire Council. And that report was by Scott Wright. From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 19th of April 2023, from the news section. Some pupils were abused at Loretta School, inquiry finds, by Lucinda Cameron. Some children at Loretta School suffered sexual, physical and emotional abuse, an inquiry has found. Loretto, in Musselburgh, East Lothian, is one of a number of boarding schools investigated by the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, SCEI, and the evidence was explored at case study hearings. Publishing her findings about the school on Wednesday, SCEI chairwoman Lady Smith found some pupils were subject to physical, sexual and emotional abuse, and that while some of them have learned to live with the impact, for some it's been and will be lifelong. She found that a small number of staff at Loretto abused children, including the late Guy Ray Hills, a French teacher at Loretto Junior School in the Nippers between 1951 and 1967, who Lady Smith described as a prolific sexual predator. He groomed many children and established abusive sexual relationships with them, some of which were one-offs, but others lasted for 4 years, she found. On Wednesday, Loretto School reaffirmed its unreserved apology and deep regret for the hurt and pain suffered, and said the well-being of pupils in its care remains its highest priority. Lady Smith made clear that the current leaders of the school inspire confidence that Loretto is now committed to child protection and it has learned that it is keen to keep learning from its past mistakes. She said, "At the outset, I want to make it clear that I find there were very many children who had positive experiences at Loreto and, in many ways, went on to have rewarding adult lives. Also, there is no doubt that the school has provided many children with a good education. However, not all children had positive experiences, and amongst those who did, there were children who also suffered abuse. Children who boarded at Loreto were exposed to risk of sexual, physical and emotional abuse. For many, those risks materialised, and I have no doubt that children were abused while in Loreto's care." Ladysmith found the response by Loreto to the behaviour of Ray Hills at the time was woefully inadequate, and he was allowed to resign rather than being dismissed. The school has previously apologised for giving a good job reference to Ray Hills after he left. She also found that another teacher groomed a final year pupil, and 4 other teachers were reported to have touched children inappropriately or made sexual comments that were offensive and upsetting to pupils. The period covered in evidence ranged from 1948 to 2021, which is beyond the terms of reference for the inquiry, which covers up to December 2014. However, Ladysmith said it would have been wrong to curtail it. Sexually abusive conduct by older children towards younger pupils was also normalised in the all-male environment of the houses at Loreto, Ladysmith said. She found there was a lack of oversight and review of the administration of corporal punishment by older boys over decades, which she described as a serious failing by the school. Ladysmith found bullying, with associated physical abuse inflicted on younger boys by older boys, was a constant at Loreto throughout the 20th century, and bullying cultures were allowed to prevail because of staff complacency and a lack of supervision by them. A Loreto spokesman said, "Today's report from the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry has been a stark reminder of the first-hand evidence given by those who survived abuse while at pupils at Loreto. We found listening to the accounts from survivors at the time of the inquiry profoundly troubling, and reading Ladysmith's report reignites these feelings. Much of the content is deeply disturbing. On behalf of the school, we reaffirm our unreserved apology and deep regret for the hurt and pain suffered." Throughout the process of the inquiry, Loreto has acknowledged the testimony of the survivors and fully recognises and respects the courage and determination that they have shown. Our aim throughout has been to listen, learn and reflect, and we will now continue to do so by considering the terms of Ladysmith's findings. As part of our ongoing work, Loreto remains open to hearing from and continuing to learn from survivors. We have worked hard to create an environment where every pupil, parent or member of staff can raise any concerns and know they will be listened to and supported by appropriate action. We remain committed to this aim, and the well-being of pupils in our care remains our highest priority. There can be no room for complacency. Whilst these findings focus on the period 1945 to 2021 and form an important milestone, they do not mark the end of our work. We strive to ensure that we get it right for every child. The inquiry, which aims to raise public awareness of the abuse of children in care, is considering evidence up to December 17th, 2014, and which is within living memory of any person who suffered abuse. And that report was by Lucinda Cameron. From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 19th of April 2023, from the news section. Union warns of travel chaos at Glasgow Airport with strike warning. Report by Martin Williams. A union has warned of a summer of travel chaos after security staff rejected a derisory annual pay offer. Unite said that 95% of the 250 staff with the security services firm ICTS, based at Glasgow Airport, emphatically voted to reject a 5% pay offer, which it said represents a significant real terms pay cut when compared to inflation running over 10%. The union says the rejection mandated the launch of an industrial action ballot. The crucial central search workers deal with passengers directly in the security search area and process them for flights. The union is now considering a formal industrial action ballot if there is no progress in pay talks. One union official warned of potential strike action if there was no progress. The workers carry out tasks such as checking documents and X-ray screening of baggage, and also cover mobile patrols, control access posts, screen all deliveries and deal with emergency services at Glasgow Airport. Union officials say that if there was strike action, the airport could not operate safely. Unite said it will have no option but to move towards an industrial ballot if the company does not significantly improve its pay offer. Pat McElvogue, Unite Regional Industrial Officer, said, around 250 ICTS central search workers have emphatically rejected a derisory pay offer which represents a massive pay cut in real terms. Unless the company improves upon its current offer, then the Glasgow airport faces a summer of travel chaos because it simply can't operate safely and efficiently without these essential workers. We're encouraging ICTS to heed the warning before this dispute escalates potentially to strike action. The union said that the Retail Prices Index, RPI, measure of inflation, show the cost of living crisis remains historically high and stands at 13.5%. The measure is used to determine rates of pay, including some UK prices, for example train tickets, mobile phone bills and some taxes, like alcohol duty. RPI is used to calculate increases in housing costs such as mortgage interest payments and council tax. Last summer, Unite said they secured an increase of up to 15% from £10 to £11.50 per hour for the workers, but the union says ICTS is refusing to move on its latest pay offer. It came after Glasgow Airport struggled over the previous 2 years due to travel restrictions as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Last year, MSPs heard that COVID had transported Scotland's airport passenger numbers back to the 1970s. The level of travellers at Glasgow Airport dropped to 2 million in 2021, and AGS Airports said that the level had not been seen since 1973. But in 2022, the passengers number rose to £6.516 million, although still over the 3 million short of the numbers recorded in 2018, before the pandemic. The busiest international routes from Glasgow are Dublin, Amsterdam, Dubai, Alicante, Tenerife South, Malaga, Palma de Mallorca, Frankfurt and Lanzarote. But Civil Aviation Authority data shows that of the 10 busiest UK airports, Glasgow Airport had the highest proportion of flights cancelled last year at 2.5%. ICTS and Glasgow Airport were approached for comment, and that report was by Martin Williams.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 19th of April 2023 from the Voices section. Kate Forbes warns of trouble for SNP at next general election. This article is by Kathleen Nutt. Kate Forbes has warned the SNP will be in trouble at the next general election if the leadership doesn't take decisive action on its internal affairs, as she described claims about the party's financing as mind-blowing. In an interview on the future of Scottish politics, Ms Forbes said that the SNP faces a critical moment and that voters are watching the party extremely carefully. Ms Forbes, the former finance secretary who lost the party's leadership race to Humza Yousaf, was speaking in her first broadcast interview since the contest and for the first time since Nicola Sturgeon's husband Peter Murrell and the SNP treasurer Colin Beattie were arrested by Police Scotland. Mr Murrell, the SNP's former chief executive, was arrested 2 weeks ago in connection with a long-running investigation into the SNP's finances and released later the same day without charge, pending further inquiries. Mr Beattie was arrested in connection with the same probe yesterday morning and last night released without charge, pending further investigation. Ms Forbes was speaking to a BBC Radio 4 programme, Leading Scotland Where, which airs this evening. Ms Forbes told the programme, "Right now people are watching with astonishment, but they want to see leadership in dealing with it and resolving it." Claims about the party's finances had been mind-blowing, she said. "I think we need decisive action or we will be in trouble," she added. She went on to say, "Right now, with questions over integrity, trust, transparency, I think voters are watching extremely carefully. We perhaps have the next election in the early part of next year. They will vote in that election on the basis of how we have sorted out our internal problems, even more than that how we govern. There is still time to sort it out. But I said throughout the campaign, I'm afraid I'm going to say it now, continuity won't cut it. Miss Forbes made it clear she thought the party could recover, but only if it took action. Asked about the way the party had been run by Miss Sturgeon and Mr. Murrell, she said, "They were obviously a very good team in the sense of managing the SNP. We are at a pretty critical moment, and it will be the response and the reaction that determines how big a problem this is for the SNP. Ms. Forbes dismissed calls made by some in the SNP for a rerun of the leadership election, but she suggested she could have won if the campaign had been longer. She told the BBC one argument I think does have an argument that the contest was so short. I came from a standing start. I hadn't been in frontline politics for about 7 months. Came right into the full glare of media scrutiny and the requirement to build a team and also build a policy platform pretty quick. There are some who have argued, who I would probably agree with, that if the contest had been longer, each candidate would have had more time to connect with the electorate. I do think that's one hypothetical that I do sympathise with. Asked if she thinks she could have won, she replies, "Yes, there's only 2,000 votes in it. But then again, I also have confidence in SNP members. They know who they are voting for." Despite calls for unity, Miss Forbes left the cabinet in Mr. Yousaf's reshuffle. At the time, the Deputy First Minister, Shona Robertson, suggested this was for better work-life balance. During the SNP's leadership contest, Ms. Forbes criticised the influence of the Scottish Greens on the SNP policies in government. She attacked the controversial deposit return scale, which would see a levy placed on drinks containers when bought to be refunded to customers when returned, and a proposed ban on the advertising of alcohol. The Highland MSP was also opposed to a legal challenge to the UK government's block on Holyrood's gender legislation, calling for the two sides to reach a compromise. She was also highly critical of a proposal by the government to introduce new marine protected areas which would see fishing banned off large parts of the Scottish coast. She said, "The primary reason that I didn't take the job was because I couldn't, due to positions that I had taken during the campaign. Having made much of integrity, I think it was important to be able to hold to these positions. I know how important it is within Cabinet to work together and support the decisions made." In the interview for the programme, Ms. Forbes was asked if she would run for the leadership in the future. She said it was highly unlikely, but added, "I never say never because you never know what might happen." An SNP spokesman said, "Under the fresh leadership of Humza Yousaf, the SNP has put in place the mechanisms to improve transparency and governance within the party. Undoubtedly, the last week has been tough for party members, but Humza Yousaf is working hard to maintain the strong trust Scottish voters have placed in the SNP at election after election in recent years." This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday, the 19th of April 2023, from the Voices section. Scottish jobs market robust despite economic challenges. This article is by Gavin Mochan. Latest official statistics show that unemployment in Scotland during the 3 months to the end of February fell to the lowest since records began in 1992, down 0.3 percentage points on the previous quarter at 3%. At the same time, however, the total number of people in work has also declined. According to the Office for National Statistics, there were 18,000 fewer people employed than in the previous 3 months. These apparently contradictory trends, which have taken hold across both Scotland and the UK more widely, have been driven by the number of people removing themselves from the labour market altogether. Defined by statisticians as economically inactive, these are people neither in nor available to work and are not looking for a job. Here in Scotland, the inactivity rate for people between the ages of 16 and 64 years was 22% in the latest set of statistics. This was 0.4 percentage points up on pre-pandemic levels and 0.7 percentage points higher than in the previous quarter. Compared to other parts of the UK, Scotland's economic inactivity rate was the second lowest. Long-term sickness is the most common reason for leaving the workforce and is the likely culprit for driving up our inactivity rate. Increases in economic inactivity in the first year of the COVID pandemic were largely driven by people aged 16 to 24 years. This makes perfect sense, as the work of many first-time job holders is in industries that were disabled by lockdown: retail, hospitality, and so forth. More recent increases in the numbers of economically inactive have been driven by those between the ages of 50 and 64 years. That said, these latest results no doubt reflect the number of students who took up temporary or part-time jobs in the lead-up to Christmas and have since returned to concentrate on their studies. On a positive note, leading indicators such as hiring demand, business activity, and confidence seem to signal strong opportunity ahead. Hiring demand across Scotland in March was at its highest level for 6 months. Just shy of 50,000 roles were advertised online, an increase of 26% compared to February. This spike was largely driven by the retail, hospitality, and marketing sectors, all of which saw increases in hiring activity of more than 60% month on month. Again, this comes as no particular surprise, as this is the time of year when these sectors gear up for the peak summer season. According to the latest PMI data from the Royal Bank of Scotland, the private sector in this country saw a second successive monthly rise in business activity, with underlying data showing quicker growth across both the manufacturing and service sectors. The rate at which private sector output grew was the strongest in 9 months, with the Scotland Business Activity Index rising from February's reading 51 to 52.9 in March. This compared favourably against the UK as a whole, 52.2, where the rate of expansion slowed.
This is from the Herald on Thursday the 20th of April 2023, from the news section. Concern over scapegoating workers over Scotland's ferry fiasco. This article is written by Martin Williams. Managers and ministers have come under fire for scapegoating workers over the ferry fiasco, which has seen 2 vessels delayed by 5 years, with costs soaring. Alex Logan, who has worked at Ferguson's for over 40 years, says that the shipyard must no longer be used as a political football by careerist ministers and incompetent managers. 2 new Lifeline ferries, Glen Sannox and Hull 802, were due online in the first half of 2018, when Ferguson Marine was under the control of tycoon Jim McColl, with one initially to serve Arran and the other to serve the Skye Triangle routes to North Uist and Harris, but they are over 5 years late. The last estimates suggested the costs of delivery could quadruple from the original £97 million cost. Ferguson Marine went into administration in August 2019, with design changes at the centre of the fiasco, with Jim McColl-led board and the ferry procurers Caledonian Maritime Assets Limited blaming each other for the issues. It led to its nationalisation. The row turned into a political football, and workers are known to have been unhappy with the way the yard has been dragged through the mud. It comes as monthly reports from Ferguson Marine recognise there is a real risk that the vessel programme would suffer without buy-in from what was described as a mature workforce. Some staff have been known to have become despondent over past developments, with question marks over whether the vessel would ever set sail. The new Ferguson Marine management has been carrying out actions to mitigate the risk, including a series of employee engagement sessions. Mr Logan, who is the GMB union's organiser at the Scottish Government-owned yard, said that the workers deserve no blame and was critical of previous management failures. Mr Logan spoke in support of a GMB Scotland call for the Scottish Government and related bodies to replace the ageing fleet with ferries built in Scotland using Scottish supply chains and to form an industrial strategy for manufacturing to guarantee a stream of work for shipyards such as Ferguson Marine to grow jobs in the sector. It has been backed by the Scottish Trade Union Congress. In support of the move, he said workers at the yard have become scapegoats for the ministers and managers responsible for the blighted construction of lifeline ferries. Mr Logan said ministers should direct more contracts to Ferguson's and other yards as part of a new shipbuilding strategy, adding, "Despite the point scoring of politicians and the failures of management, I'm proud to call myself a Ferguson shipbuilder. We will not accept our name being dragged through the mud or a workforce being used as a political football for political gain." Politicians have used Ferguson's to further their own careers while jeopardising the jobs of those at Ferguson's. He said the experience, talent and skill of the workforce have been unfairly tarnished because of delays due to management changing blueprints mid-build. These were not problems of our making, yet we are the ones caught in the political crossfire. He said instead of trying to blame the workforce, ministers should recognise its talent and commitment and award the yard contracts for more ferries capable of securing lifeline routes to the islands. He has been speaking in support of a motion put to voicing alarm at the Scottish Government's failure to protect ferry services and in a passionate defence of the workforce at Ferguson Marine in Port Glasgow. He called for an industrial strategy to replace CalMac's ageing fleet with ferries built in Scotland using Scottish supply chains and protect and create jobs at shipyards like Ferguson's. He said politicians love to talk about the shipbuilding heritage of the Clyde, but warned the industry must be part of Scotland's present and future industrial strategy. He said, as an island nation, a strong domestic shipbuilding industry is an obvious need. With the ageing fleet that serves Scotland's islands, the need is urgent. Unfortunately, those island communities are being failed. He said a recent award of a BAE Systems contract to help deliver Type 26 frigates was testament to the yard's capabilities, and said the Scottish Government should show the same faith in its work. He said there can and must be a future for Ferguson's. That requires a political will that was shown when the Scottish Government intervened to save the yard. The same will must now be shown by delivering a direct award of planned builds to Ferguson's and other shipyards in Scotland for the new island fleets. The STUC Congress supported a rail, maritime and transport workers backed by Mr Logan, which expressed alarm at the Scottish Government's failure to procure sufficient new vessels on lifeline ferry networks, which continues to be exploited by employers and industry commentators hostile to trade unions, equality and public ownership. It also calls for CalMac operated lifeline routes to be protected from competition from private operators. And they call for publicly owned and operated lifeline services, with new ferries designed and built in Scotland, greater investment in services and all passenger fares, a stronger voice for communities, passengers and increased employment for ferry staff on collectively bargained terms and conditions. That exclusive article was written by Martin Williams. This is from the Herald on Thursday the 20th of April 2023, from the news section. MP calls on UK government to ease up on medicinal cannabis red tape. This article is written by Andrew Learmonth. A former Scottish Secretary, David Mundell, is urging the government to ease up on the red tape around medicinal cannabis. The Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweedale MP says the sector could be potentially transformational for his constituency, where one firm has built an 11,000 square metre production facility. Hilltop Leaf, who recently secured £2 million of private investment, believe that the industry could create dozens of jobs for the area. While medicinal cannabis use is growing, the UK currently relies solely on imports. Mr. Mundell told the Herald, "I believe that the industry has huge economic potential, particularly for rural areas, but it faces a lot of regulatory and operational barriers. Here's a multi-million-pound industry and we've got the opportunity to be at the forefront of it," he added. He said the UK and Scottish governments needed to be better coordinated and make things more straightforward for the industry. That comes from being a bit more joined up, because everybody and their granny seems to be involved in the application process, he said, with the Home Office, the NHS and other bodies all part of the regulatory regime. Mr. Mundell also called for the prescribing of medical cannabis to be more straightforward. Although that has been legal now for some time, the number of NHS prescriptions is very low, he said, especially compared to the private healthcare sector. The Tory claimed there were various blockages in the way that the medical system works that were impeding the number of NHS prescriptions. Hilltop Leaf, which holds a manufacturer's specials licence and wholesaler dealer authorisation from the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, aims to produce pharmaceutical-grade cannabis-based products for medicinal use in humans. Ultimately, the firm believes it can supply more than 10% of the UK market. Mr. Mundell is to raise the economic contribution of medicinal cannabis during a Commons debate today. That article was written by Andrew Learmonth. This is from the Herald on Thursday the 20th of April 2023, from the news section. Scottish ultramarathon runner disqualified from race after using car. This article is written by Emma Sablejack. Scottish ultramarathon runner Joasia Zakrzewski has been disqualified from a race because she was found to have used a car. The 47-year-old from Dumfries had finished third in the GB Ultras Manchester to Liverpool race on April the 7th. But she is believed to have travelled 2.5 miles in a car after mapping data found she had covered a mile in 1 minute and 40 seconds. The runner, who has set records in the UK for over 100-mile and 200-mile races, told the BBC she made a massive error. She revealed she had become lost around the halfway mark when she started to limp due to an ache in her leg. Amid worsening levels of pain, she saw a friend on the side of the course and accepted a lift to the next checkpoint to tell marshals she was pulling out. The marshals persuaded her to continue and she agreed to carry on in a non-competitive way. Ms. Zakrzewski said, "I made a massive error accepting the trophy and should have handed it back. I was tired and jet-lagged and felt sick. I hold my hands up. I should have handed them back and not had pictures done, but I was feeling unwell and spaced out and not thinking clearly." Third place has now been awarded to Mel Sykes. Wayne Drinkwater, the director of GB Ultras race, told the BBC it was a very disappointing thing. "The issue has been investigated and having reviewed the data from our race tracking system, GPX data, statements provided from our recent team, other competitors and from the participant herself, we can confirm that a runner has now been disqualified from the event, having taken vehicle transport during part of the route," he said. The matter is now with the TRA, Trail Running Association, and in turn UK Athletics, UKA, as the regulatory bodies. That article was written by Emma Sablejack.
From the Herald Scotland, Friday the 21st of April 2023, from the news section, Dominic Raab quits as Deputy PM with bitter attack on bullying inquiry. Report by Tom Gordon, political editor. Dominic Raab has resigned as Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary, complaining bitterly about the bullying probe that forced him out. In setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent, he said, warning it would encourage spurious complaints against ministers. He also attacked civil servants for systematic leaking of skewed and fabricated claims to the media. The inquiry found he had been intimidating and aggressive to officials. Mr Rabb has been urged to stand down as the MP for Ayrshire and Walton, where he had a majority of just 2,743 over the Liberal Democrats in 2019. UK Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said that week Mr Sunak should have sacked Mr Rabb rather than letting him resign. One of Rishi Sunak's closest allies, Mr Rabb had been under investigation for 5 months by Adam Tolley KC after 8 formal complaints into his conduct in 3 different departments. Mr Sunak received the findings of the facts yesterday morning, but failed to live up to his promise to make a swift call on whether to sack Mr Rabb. Opposition parties accused him of dithering delay as the issue dragged on overnight. After refusing to quit yesterday on the grounds he did not believe he had broken the ministerial code, Mr Rabb spared his boss the final decision and left the government himself just before 10 a.m. However, his resignation statement angrily attacked the process. He began with an apparent admission that there had been a finding of bullying against him. I called for the inquiry and undertook to resign if it made any finding of bullying whatsoever. I believe it is important to keep my word, he said. But the tone then became increasingly defiant and unhappy. Mr Rabb went on, whilst I feel duty bound to accept the outcome of the inquiry, it dismissed all but 2 of the claims levelled against me. I also believe that its 2 adverse findings are flawed and set a dangerous precedent for the conduct of good government. First, ministers must be able to exercise direct oversight with respect to senior officials over critical negotiations conducted on behalf of the British people. Otherwise, the democratic and constitutional principle of ministerial responsibility will be lost. This was particularly true during my time as Foreign Secretary in the context of the Brexit negotiations over Gibraltar, when a senior diplomat breached the mandate agreed by Cabinet. Second, ministers must be able to give direct critical feedback and briefings and submissions to senior officials in order to set the standards and drive the reform the public expect of us. Of course, this must be done within reasonable bounds. Mr Tolley concluded that I had not once, in 4.5 years, sworn or shouted at anyone, let alone thrown anything or otherwise physically intimidated anyone, nor intentionally sought to belittle anyone. I am genuinely sorry for any unintended distress or offence that any officials felt as a result of the pace, standards and challenge that I brought to the Ministry of Justice. That is, however, what the public expect of ministers working on their behalf. He concluded, in setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent. It will encourage spurious complaints against ministers and have a chilling effect on those driving change on behalf of your government and ultimately the British people. Finally, I raised with you a number of improprieties that came to light during the course of this inquiry. They include the systematic leaking of skewed and fabricated claims to the media in breach of the rules of the inquiry and the Civil Service Code of Conduct, and the coercive removal by a senior official of dedicated private secretaries from my Ministry of Justice private office in October of last year. I hope these will be independently reviewed. I remain as supportive of you in this government as when I first introduced you at your campaign leadership launch last July. You have proved to be a great Prime Minister in very challenging times, and you can count on my support from the backbenches. UK Lib Dem Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper said, Dominic Raab has shown he is not only unfit to serve as a minister, but is totally unfit to represent his constituents at Parliament. He should resign as an MP and trigger a by-election so the people of Ayrshire and Walton can finally have the MP they deserve. Voters across Surrey and the Blue Wall are fed up with this endless Conservative chaos and MPs who take their communities for granted. At the next election in Ayrshire and Walton, it will be a 2-horse race between more Conservative Party chaos or a hard-working Liberal Democrat MP who will listen and stand up for local people. Mike Clancy, General Secretary of the White Collar Union Prospect, said, There has been a toxic culture at the top of the government for too long, with civil servants and public trust paying the price for this chaos. The Prime Minister now needs to clean out the rest of the stables. These issues go to the heart of the anger and distrust many people feel towards the way our country runs. It is time for ministers to step up and start restoring trust for both civil servants and the good of the country. It is never easy to speak out about abuse from someone in power, and I would like to pay tribute to those who have had the courage to do so. This should be a wake-up call for ministers, that the way to deliver for the public is to respect and value public servants. Mr Sunak has yet to respond to the resignation or publish the Tolley report. Mr Rabb had always denied bullying staff, despite complaints arising from his time as Foreign Secretary, Brexit Secretary, and during the first of his 2 stints as Justice Secretary, insisted he behaved professionally. He claimed to have a forthright manner, but nothing worse. However, leaks from those familiar with the Tolley report said it made grim reading for Mr Rabb, whose government career was toast. Mr Rabb initially refused to resign yesterday after receiving the findings, putting the decision on whether he should stay into Mr Sunak's hands, as the PM is the ultimate arbiter of the ministerial code. Making that choice harder was the Tolley report presenting bold findings of fact, rather than making a recommendation for action. Had the matter been investigated by Mr Sunak's ethics czar, Sir Laurie Magnus, there would have been more of a steer for the PM. However, because of dithering over Sir Laurie's appointment, he was not in place when Mr Tolley was commissioned to investigate in November. Political loyalty also played a part, as Mr Rabb had been Mr Sunak's most dogged supporter during last year's Tory leadership contest with Liz Truss. His exit leaves a major gap in Mr Sunak's cabinet, with speculation about who will replace him. The Prime Minister sacked Nadhim Zahawi as Tory party chair in January amid controversy over his tax affairs. Mr Sunak also lost Sir Gavin Williamson just days after appointing him to the Cabinet Office, after it was alleged he sent expletive-laden messages to a former Chief Whip. A Labour source told the BBC that Mr Rabb was the second Cabinet bully allowed to resign. Sunak failed to sack both him and Williamson. They added, "We've had 13 years of Tory PMs trying to dodge the rules and defend their mates. Enough is enough." Downing Street suggested Mr Sunak had accepted Mr Rabb broke the ministerial code with the findings of bullying. The PM's official spokesman said, "You can see the aspects relevant to the code are set out in the report. I think those speak for themselves. The Prime Minister rightly thinks it's right that any findings whatsoever that are deemed to be bullying, it's right to resign. That's a commitment the former Secretary of State made, and he's upheld that commitment." Asked if he would condemn the behaviour, the spokesman said, "Clearly, any bullying in general terms is unacceptable, and there are clear rules that apply to that." He said the PM regarded Mr Tolley's report as detailed and thorough, following the former Justice Secretary's criticism. "This is a very detailed, thorough piece of work. He thanks him for it. It has allowed him to come to the judgment with regards to the former Secretary of State. It is important he appointed someone of significant experience, which Adam Tolley is, to carry out this work, and I think it will give people confidence that these issues are looked at thoroughly and properly." And that report was by political editor Tom Gordon.
The Herald on the 21st of April. Albury Plaza sounds like a rundown shopping centre, not a movie star, by Lorne Jackson. Love Glasgow style. Forget Paris, Rome or Venice, as the diary recently confirmed. Glasgow is the world capital of armour. Jenny Barr from Cross Hill once went on a blind date and ended up in a French restaurant. The chap she was with asked the waiter about the lobster, admitting he had never eaten the dish before. So the waiter attempted to describe the flavour until the chap haughtily interrupted. "I'm not interested in the flavour," he said. "Just tell me one thing. Does it taste expensive?" Jenny, who was rapidly discovering that she didn't much like her date, said to him, "If you want something to eat that tastes expensive, we should have gone to the local chippy, and you could ask the counter staff to deep fry my earrings." And no, there wasn't a second date. On the lam, our Lewis correspondent John Mulholland informs us that spring has definitely arrived in that blissful part of Scotland. The sun is shining, sometimes, adds John, and the lambs in the croft at the bottom of my garden are frolicking and jumping around. Recently I found myself betting on which lamb can jump the highest, so much so that some might say I have a gambolling problem. Centre of attention. Film fan Bob Reed and his wife were considering watching the recent release, Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre, an action flick starring Jason Statham and Hugh Grant. Bob was reciting a list of the other actors for the benefit of his wife to see if the film was something she might enjoy. When he came to an actress called Aubrey Plaza, his wife shuddered. "What a ridiculous name for a movie star," she said. "Sounds like a run-down shopping centre in Cumbernauld." Legal troubles. Embarrassed reader Kelly Graham reveals that as a youngster she was a tad confused about her father's profession. "I knew he was a lawyer," said Kelly, "but when he mentioned a lawsuit, I thought that meant the jacket and trousers he wore to work." More booking bandage, FOR, no entirely plausible reason. The diary finds itself attempting to improve classic movies by adding the word library to their titles. Gordon Smith says that in these days of tight budget setting and stringency, there should really be a film titled 7 Books for 7 Libraries. Chocks away. Financial news from reader Eva Norton, who says Cadbury have donated a giant chocolate bar to the Bank of England. It's a massive boost for the economy. That was by Lon Jackson. The Herald on the 21st of April and the Voices section. Alan Simpson, climate crisis is real, but don't patronise us. In recent times, there seems to have been a rush to hyperbole each other when it comes to climate change. There is no shortage of do-gooders screaming and screaming until they are sick about the impending doom as they launch another taxpayer-funded initiative to save the seahorse and make themselves feel good in the process. But this week, hyperbole was taken to a whole new level in terms of a hysterical reaction to absolutely nothing at all. Step forward Catherine Mealing-Jones, Chief Executive of the Beacons National Park, or Banno Breiking National Park, pronounced Ban-ai Brook-eining, or the Bannu for short as it should be now called. To celebrate its 66th birthday as a national park, it was announced that its name would be changed to the Welsh name on account of the fact it's in Wales and it sounds better in Welsh. Regardless, it's a nice touch. Preserving the Welsh language and its culture is not a bad thing and should be very much celebrated. But Miss Mealing-Jones went further. In fact, she went so much further, we may never see or hear from her again. Giddy with excitement, her main point, probably screamed into a microphone while slapping her head, was that it was to help combat climate change. I have absolutely no idea of her logic either, particularly as many trees will need to be cut down to make proper paper and signs for the new name. Maybe she knows something that we don't. Climate change only happens in English and never in Welsh. She said the present name, referencing wood-burning, carbon-emitting beacons, no longer fits the ethos of the park. She said, presumably with a straight face, given that we're trying to provide leadership on decarbonisation, a giant burning brazier is not a good look. And there, in a nutshell, is everything that's wrong with green crusades, particularly in the public sector, which is becoming ever more fast and loose with taxpayers' money on an absolute claptrap of the highest order. For those who have never been to the Brecon Beacons, there are a range of hills in South Wales and are quite pretty, if a bit bleak. They also stand above Metha-Tidville, a town so grim it makes Hart Hills seem like a cross between Las Vegas and Paris, and that takes some doing. They were formed more than 43 million years ago, during the Silurian and Devonian geological eras, and are known as beacons because they are made out of red sandstone, which can act like beacons. So no bonfires were lit on the top, so quite why Miss Mealing-Jones made that ridiculous analogy is unclear. The grand plan, announced as part of the name change, seems to restore tree cover, wetlands, hedgerows, peat bogs, and wildflowers to attract wildlife. People will also be encouraged to farm in a way that benefits nature, such as restricting grazing to certain areas, leaving a cover crop over winter for birds to eat, and not spreading manure or fertilizer where it could contaminate watercourses. There are many good things including in their grand plan, and our 2 national parks should be watching with interest and look to introduce similar here. But it raises the question, after 66 years of being a national park, why has it taken them this long to work out how to conserve the countryside, which is the main point of them after all? However, as if to prove that some public sector bosses can find a low point to stoop to and then stoop lower, they have included weather advice for farmers so they can tell what to grow and when. Apart from meteorologists, if there's one group of people on the planet who understand and know the weather, then it's farmers. Their livelihoods depend on it, after all, and they don't need a shrill, office-paced public servant to teach them. But Helen Roderick, Sustainable Development Manager for the park, said a group of 6 farmers is sharing hydrological maps with other farmers to help them avoid causing pollution. She said, "It's just simple measures, but things that are highly effective." The other thing they've done is install weather stations on all 4 or 5 of the farms. Those are open through an app to any farmer who wants to understand the rain, the wind, ground conditions, to make sure that what they're doing at the right time in the right weather conditions. As patronising goes, she may as well get up into the moors, pat them on the head and say it looks like it might be raining, and then hand them a pair of wellies in case their feet get muddy in the fields. And that was by Alan Simpson. The Herald on the 21st of April and the Voices section. Agenda: We need to change the way we farm, by Mads Fischer-Moller. Over recent weeks, many of us settled down to watch the BBC's Wild Isles series. The footage showed some of Scotland's most incredible nature, from orcas to red squirrels, to macaque to forests, but it also highlighted just how much nature we have lost. The way we have worked and managed our land and seas for decades to produce food has taken a toll, and we can no longer delay taking action to halt declines in species or the stubbornly high greenhouse gas emissions from food and agriculture. The link between the food we eat and the decline in nature was highlighted by Henry Dimbleby, co-founder of Leon Restaurants and the Sustainable Restaurant Association, who resigned from his post as the UK government's food czar due to inaction on obesity. He was recently quoted in the Herald saying, "The way humans eat today is killing both us as species and the environment." This is reflected in trends across Scotland. Our wildlife is in decline. We are off course to meet our climate targets, and our diet is causing 2/3 of us to be overweight or obese, the highest prevalence in all of Europe. We all need the Scottish Government to lay out an ambitious new path that allows us to make changes to what we eat while protecting nature and supporting farmers who transition to new ways of farming. Currently, our food system is engineered to deliver cheap foods in high fat, sugar and salt that we often find hard to resist. If we want to eat healthily, farm with nature, and deliver on our climate targets, we must eat more fruit, vegetables, and whole grain. Less but better quality meat. That's why the upcoming Good Food Nation plan must present a new vision for Scottish food and a clear pathway to make the healthy and sustainable foods accessible and affordable for all. This means redesigning our food system to reinvigorate nature, tackle climate change, and deliver enough healthy food for the Scottish population. Farming must work in partnership with nature, which is why we want to see future farm support schemes designed to let nature thrive while reducing emissions and still producing nutritious food. With farming responsible for 1/5 of Scotland's greenhouse gases, even those keen to tackle emissions are struggling because of outdated policies that reward land ownership instead of environmental outcomes. Farmers and crofters urgently need a clear plan that sees the industry moving towards a net zero future, similar to what most other countries are developing. This is not going to be easy, but clarity and honesty is needed to give Scottish farmers certainty and to make sure that the transition to nature and climate-friendly farming is fair. MSPs have a unique opportunity this year to show leadership and ambition and allow Scotland to become a good food nation. Politicians must use the upcoming Good Food Nation plan and the agricultural and natural environment bills to signal to farmers, industry, retailers and consumers what the future of Scottish food should be. That was by Mads Fisher-Muller of WWF Scotland.
Herald Scotland recorded on Thursday 20th of April 2023. Arts and Entertainments. The Berlin Gambit by David O'Donnell. Book Review by Alistair Mabbitt. The Berlin Gambit, David O'Donnell. Polygon, £9.99. In December 1941, two British trained Czech soldiers, Jan Kubis and Josef Gabček, parachuted into Czechoslovakia with the aim of killing high-ranking Nazi Reinhard Heydrich. They succeeded 5 months later, ambushing Heydrich's car when it slowed at a hairpin bend in Prague. Subsequently, the two men were betrayed by an informer and took their own lives in a church cellar rather than be captured, events powerfully dramatised in the 1975 film Operation Daybreak. That's the starting point for Scottish lawyer David O'Donnell's compelling novel. It's his first foray into fiction writing, but you'd never know it from the skills on display here. There are thriller writers with 10 or more novels under the belts who would struggle to blend character, tension and transparently fluent prose in the way that O'Donnell has. In his version of events, an SS report has already been made of Heydrich's assassination, but Hitler has deemed that a second independent investigation is necessary. SS Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler commissions a civilian, Rolf Schneider, chief investigator of the Berlin Criminal Police Department. Schneider, considered the best detective in Germany, is 46, single, with no friends to speak of, and no interests outside work. Crucially, for Himmler's purposes, he's entirely uninterested in politics. Schneider has noticed there don't seem to be as many Jewish people around as before, but it's not something that weighs in his mind. Almost as an afterthought, Himmler lets him know that if, in the course of his investigation, he happens to come across Heydrich's stash of secret files, all the better. Surmising that the British-backed assassination had help from inside the Nazi ranks and suspecting Himmler above all, Schneider gets to work, armed with a letter from Hitler himself that is guaranteed to open doors in Nazi-occupied Europe. The investigation turns out to be Schneider's voyage into his own heart of darkness. Like everyone else he knows, he's turned a blind eye to what's been going on in his country, but the deeper he probes into Heydrich's death and the files that Himmler wants to get his hands on, the less able he is to deny the rottenness at the core of the regime. He senses the pall of guilt hanging over the village of Dachau, and realises for the first time that he shares it. With a sudden keen insight, he knew his days of looking the other way were gone forever. Bolstered by his promise to Heydrich's widow to uncover the truth about her husband's death, and his growing feeling for Heydrich's former secretary, Anna, his investigation turns into a moral crusade, which he hopes may make a real difference to Germany's future. The story is essentially a battle of wits between Schneider and Himmler, Detective pitted against politician, each disadvantaged by his inability to fully fathom the psychology of the other. Either could miscalculate at any moment, but for Schneider to slip up would mean his certain death. As the locations shift at a rapid pace from Hitler's mountaintop retreat of Berchtesgaden to Prague, then Paris, then the deadly wasteland of despair outside Stalingrad, before Schneider cloaks himself in the garb of an SS officer to learn the truth about Auschwitz, O'Donnell scarcely puts a foot wrong. The Berlin Gambit is a very strong debut, weaving Schneider's transformation from apolitical cop to anti-Nazi desperado through a gripping paranoid narrative that embraces conspiracy at the highest levels of Nazi command, a secret deal with a foreign power, and a nail-biting climax. By Alistair Mabbitt.
From the Herald, Monday, the 24th of April, 2023. Sports section. John Higgins dominates Kieran Wilson to win with session to spare. From the Herald online. John Higgins produced a vintage display to book his place in the quarter-finals of the World Snooker Championship with a session to spare, after sweeping past Kieran Wilson 13-2 at the Crucible. The four-time champion, who had endured a disappointing season with a string of early exits from ranking events, continued where he had left off after defeating David Grace 10-3 in his opening match. The veteran 47-year-old Scot never looked back as he built a commanding 8-0 lead in Sunday's opening session. It was a clinical start from Higgins, who produced 136 and 137 total clearances, with two more half-centuries further extending his lead. Wilson, who'd made a maximum 147 break in the first round, was troubled by his cue, continually checking both the tip and butt after missing what had looked like routine chances. Further breaks of 134 and 80 saw Higgins claim a remarkable first session whitewash in the first to 13 encounter. Higgins edged the opening frame of the evening session 61-57 and then moved 10-0 ahead with another century break of 128. Wilson finally got a frame on the board in the 11th with a run of 78. But it was Higgins who snatched the last before the mid-session interval as he recovered a points deficit of 60 with the snooker to edge closer to the quarter-finals. Although Wilson pulled another back on the resumption, it was only delaying the inevitable as Higgins took the 14th frame and then finished off the match with the break of 80 to book a 17th appearance in the last 8 at the Crucible. I am over the moon just to beat Kieran, but to beat him with a session to spare, I would never have believed that was possible, Higgins said on Eurosport. I felt as if I could just play there all day. It felt really good, and you do not get that many times here. It was amazing to be 8-0, and it was in my mind to just share the session 4-all and be 12-4 in front going into the third session. But it is a bonus winning it. I now get a day off. I've been feeling as if this has been coming for the past months, that I could go on a run of breaks, and that is what you need to do here, because I'm going to come up against that sooner rather than later. That report was by Herald Sport Online. From the Herald, Monday the 24th of April 2023. Sports section. Scotland defender McKenna suffers injury setback just weeks after Hanley blow. By Darren Johnson, Herald Online. Scotland defender Scott McKenna has been hit with another setback after only just returning from a hamstring injury. The former Aberdeen centre-back was forced off inside the first half of Nottingham Forest's 3-2 defeat at Liverpool on Saturday with a suspected collarbone problem. McKenna is sent for scans to determine the extent of the injury. The Anfield clash was only McKenna's second game after sustaining a hamstring problem at the start of February, an issue that saw the 26-year-old miss Scotland's victories over Cyprus and Spain last month. Fellow Scotland defender Grant Hanley is already facing a lengthy spell on the sidelines with a ruptured Achilles. And ahead of June's Euro 2024 qualifiers against Norway and Georgia, national team boss Steve Clarke will be hoping that McKenna's injury is not serious. Forest boss Steve Cooper said, "It will be firmed up in the next day or two. There was talk about his collarbone. I guess x-rays and scans will confirm everything up in the next day or two, but it didn't look great. We know what he's like, so for him to walk off as he did, it doesn't look great. As always, the next couple of days will determine exactly what's what with it. That story was by Darren Johnson.
Herald Scotland recorded on Monday 24th of April 2023. Arts and Entertainments. Review: Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv by Andrei Kurkov. By Rosemary Goring, columnist. Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv, Andrei Kurkov, translated by Ruben Woolley, Maclehose, £16.99. By Rosemary Goring. In a graveyard in Lviv, a group of die-hard hippies descends at night time to pay homage at an iron crucifix. One of them touches up the white paint and the lettering. It reads Jimi Hendrix 1942 to 1970. Since the musician's tragically early death, these admirers have been bound to him spiritually, artistically and politically. Far-fetched though it sounds, like so much in Kurkov's drolly surreal fiction, they believe that his hand was removed from his body after burial in the USA and lies beneath their feet in Ukrainian soil. This annual anniversary reunion seems to be going to plan until a stranger joins them. He is Captain Ryabtsev, a former KGB officer whose job it once was to monitor the city's hippies. His prime target was Alec, the leader of this long-haired group for whom grubby denim is a second skin. Now belatedly, he has come to apologise for spying on them, at the same time revealing that all along he had been secretly in sympathy with those he monitored. The opening pages of Andrei Kurkov's novel are inimitably his, a pleasantly meandering, low-key gathering of one-off characters who fit no mould, but who will be tasked with carrying a whimsical plot to its unlikely but satisfying conclusion. Ukraine's best-known contemporary novelist, whose melancholy comedy Death in the Penguin, 1996, made his name, Kurkov has been described as a Ukrainian Murakami. His last book was a day-by-day record of the present Russian invasion, Diary of an Invasion, 2022, and before that came a novel, Grey Bees, 2018, set in the no man's land between the pro-Russian and Ukrainian nationalist parts of the Donbass region. With Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv, however, he's gone in a different direction. As he explains in his acknowledgements, the mayor of Lviv invited Kurkov to write a novel about this enigmatic city. The result is a foray into the gently magical realist contemporary world in which Kurkov thrives, a realm where animals and fish and imaginary characters hold their own alongside his human cast. While the setting is modern, no reference is made to Ukraine's current predicament. The sense of unease and dread that suffuses the plot, however, feels like a nod to the fragility of civilization and the many unforeseen ways in which hostile forces can destroy it. Alec, who strikes up a friendship with the former KGB officer, is one of two central protagonists. The other is a young man called Taras. His profession, if it deserves that title, is to rid men of their kidney stones. His methods are unconventional, but well suited to the cobblestones of an old and potholed city. Taking patients and hair-raising drives around the city's worst roads after midnight, he is usually guaranteed to shift the stones. Like a trophy hunter, he collects these specimens in a jar, fingering them as if they were jewels. In time, as they become the means by which he meets and cures a young woman with a rare allergy, their value becomes priceless. Most of Taras's customers are Polish, a shorthand for well-off. Kurkov makes the most of the long-standing rivalry between these nations, as when Taras and his clients discuss when Ukraine would finally catch up with Poland, repeatedly coming to the intermediate conclusion of never. There are many amusing and even romantic touches to this tale, although Kurkov retains an Eastern European respect for what you might call kitchen sink detail. The carefully thought-out furnishings of Spartan homes, the making of coffee or meals, the importance of food and alcohol. His depictions of his characters are similarly precise. Taras's best friend Oksana, for instance, is pinpointed in a sentence. Though she was an actress, nature had given her the air of a director. Even a residential block is endowed with a personality, with wooden stairs, each of which give its own particular sound, like the keys of a worn old grand piano. Most strikingly of all, the city's mainly homeless are given a stage, peopling its nighttime streets like a faded mirror image of their daytime compatriots, and offering a new angle in what makes this city tick. Kurkov's cameos of poverty and the kindness of strangers feels like a peephole in the real rather than fictional Lviv. But beneath its closely observed interiors and everyday characters, the underlying plot is sinister. Something's not quite right with Lviv, says Ryaptsev. A particular sensation, like some sort of catastrophe, is just about to occur. This manifests itself at night when in various parts of the city he and others have suddenly been aware of peculiar vibrations accompanied by the smell of iodine and rotting seaweed and the inimical cries of seagulls overhead. As salt water begins to flow through people's taps and starfish and crabs scuttle through the streets, it seems that Ryabtsev's crackpot theory might be right, that the prehistoric Carpathian Sea on whose bed Lviv was built is trying to reassert itself. Should it succeed, the city will be engulfed. This being Kirchhoff, there's no fear of the novel turning into a horror story. This being Kirchhoff, however, also means that every twist and turn carries political freight. Justice is integral to history, and history is the highest judge, thinks Ryaptsev, pinpointing its fundamental theme. With characters straddling today in the old Soviet era, Jimi Hendrix (brackets) and his fans (close brackets) stand out as a symbol of the westernisation of Soviet leaders dreaded. In comparison with Hendrix's liberated, experimental and unpredictable work, writes Kirchhoff, in every Soviet song you could hear the concrete task the authors had set themselves. This music was intended to inspire nation-building activities, whereas Hendrix's led to the dangerous territory of contemplation and enlightenment. A novel about the past and its lingering reverberations, Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv is a multi-layered, Chegov-like picture of modern-day Ukraine. Entertaining and poignant, it manages to convey the spirit and plight of the place without once sullying its pages with the names of those presently intent on its annihilation. By Rosemary Goring.
From the Herald, Tuesday the 25th of April, 2023. From the opinion section. Glasgow's new on-street bin scheme seems doomed to fail, by Katrina Stewart. You can never delve too deeply into a community Facebook group before the subject of the bins comes up. The bins, the dreaded bins. Linger too long at the bins, and before you know it, someone will have chucked in a line about seeing a rat the size of a cat. This is plainly one of those made-up things. No one has really seen a rat the size of a cat in real life. Has it become law because it rhymes? Or is it just because it's easy to assume that everyone knows what a cat looks like? It's a dreadful metric of measurement, though, the cat. A feline-sized rodent is meaningless. Some cats have a lot of fluff that gives them an impressive extra girth to the old silhouette. A raggedy street cat might, in fact, be smaller than some of your medium to large-sized rats. New York has just appointed a rat czar who may have some answers. No matter how tall the rat tails on your local Facebook page, the rat anecdotes going the rounds in New York seem outlandish. Mechanics in the city report an increase in the number of rodents found in cars, chewing through wires and that sort of thing. The New York Times has a litany of rat horror stories, all with details so nice it makes you forget the horror at the heart of the tale. In one, a graphic designer in a second-floor apartment on Pacific Street in Brooklyn lifted her kitchen garbage bag only for a rat to leap out and, quote, parkour off my leg, before scuttling behind the oven. In another, a gentleman was appalled to see a rat emerge from his lavatory. I grabbed the closest weight I could find, he's reported to have said, a copy of George Orwell's autobiography, and set it on top of the toilet. Another woman was distressed when a rat wandered over her foot on a train, made worse by her having been sitting across from a clique of cool teens at the time. It was a dual horror situation of cool teenagers making fun of you and a rat on your foot. Kathleen Karadi is New York City's new Director of Rodent Mitigation, and it sounds like she has her work cut out for her. Miss Karadi is a former schoolteacher, so presumably she could deal with rats and teenagers in one fell swoop. Anyway, rats the size of cats. Over the past few years, Glasgow has experienced a rise in the number of rats spotted in the city. There has been talk of a waste management crisis, and the refuse workers, represented by the GMB union, have been on strike in increasing dissatisfaction with their pay and conditions. No hint as yet for a rat czar for Glasgow, But like New York, the local authority has been trying to come up with new ways to make the city purse strings stretch while sorting out the refuse problem, all with the environment in mind. No easy task, and one must sympathise. But will the proposed new waste management plan for Scotland's largest city really work? A pilot project is about to begin in the south side, before being rolled out Glasgow-wide. It seems to be so bold a change as to be potentially bonkers. Rather than have backcourt bins behind tenement flats, the council proposes to install large banks of bins in the road. Each bin hub will serve between 40 and 50 properties, and no resident will be more than 50 metres from a bin. Somewhat optimistically, the council say the hope is that, rather than taking out the rubbish and recycling all at once, residents will bring out smaller collections of items when they happen to be leaving their flats anyway. Will this be a suitable solution citywide? We're all going to have keys to our own bins. Yet, in some neighbourhoods, like mine, there are broken closed doors because people can't see fit to bother with using a key or a fob to gain access to their own home. Will they keep hold of a bin store key, or will the locks be broken within days of the bins being installed? The council says enhanced enforcement will stop folk fly tipping next to the bins or dumping their stuff in the wrong receptacle. One of the penalties will be to refuse to empty the bin until the offending material is removed by residents. Strap in for a long wait there. The council changed its trade waste procedures to a system whereby firms only put their rubbish out for collection during specific short timeframes. At all other times, waste must be stored within commercial premises. Waste permanently stored on our streets attracts vermin, causes litter and obstruction issues for people with mobility issues, says an official council document. Improving the appearance of our streets will benefit all who use them. Will large banks of bins on the road improve the appearance of our streets? No. If the system didn't work for commercial bins, will it work for residential waste? The refuse collectors have apparently complained of safety issues, such as the weight of lifting bins from back courts out onto the street. This new system will, the council says, address this. Hopefully it won't address it by cutting jobs, if residents are expected to change their behaviour to remove the need for a portion of the work carried out by bin men. There will be no glass bins either, because the deposit return scheme is supposed to make up for that. That's a whole other column. The bins are a constant problem, and the council is right in that innovative schemes should be considered. This one seems too easy for sceptics to challenge as an innovation too far. This article was by Katrina Stewart.
The Herald on the 25th of April and the Arts and Ents section. Terrible investment to support music merchandise venture by Kirsty Dorsey. Scottish syndicate Investing Women Angels, IWA, has led a £195,000 equity investment round into merchandise technology platform developer Terrible. Headed by Chief Executive Tertia Willis, London-based Terrible supports musical artists as well as video gaming, comedy and other creative industries by creating, sourcing and developing unique merchandise relevant to its clients' audiences. This is sold both online and in person at concerts and events internationally. The Terrible platform facilitates payments and logistics as well as accumulating sales and inventory data to help artists and brands maximize profitability and develop long-term merchandising revenue streams. Operating within a total addressable market of £2.1 billion, Terrible currently has more than 700 clients on its roster, including Roisin Murphy, PJ Harvey, King Cruel, J. Paul, rapper Professor Green, and indie rockers Black Country, New Road. The investment round was led by IWA, Scotland's first all-female angel syndicate, and supported by other individual investors. The money will be used to further develop the Terrible platform and support expansion into the US market. Since its inception, the company has developed a close relationship with IWA and its sister company Accelerate Her. Ms. Willis was among the winners at the 2020 Accelerate Her Awards, celebrating emerging female founders. As part of the investment, IWA member Pamela Barclay will join Terrible as its investor director and take a seat on the board. IWA is immensely proud to be leading this investment to support Terrible, an innovative and inspiring merchandise technology business, bringing a fresh and unique approach to its market, Ms. Barclay said. I'm also very excited to be joining the board and supporting the business through this growth phase as its investment director. Ms. Willis added, "We're delighted to secure the confidence and support of investing women angels in this funding round and to welcome Pamela onto our board." 2023 has already seen a period of exciting growth and expansion. We look forward to working with Pamela and IWA to ensure the rest of the year and beyond continues in the same vein. And that was by Kirsty Dorsey. The Herald on the 25th of April and the Arts and Ends section. Night Sleeper. Glasgow filming begins on BBC One Drama by Craig Williams. Filming has begun in Glasgow on new BBC One drama Night Sleeper. The series is described as a real-time thriller set on a sleeper train travelling from Glasgow to London while a government agency desperately tries to intervene in the rapidly escalating events on board. Penned by BAFTA awarding writer Nick Leather to Control Room Mother's Day, the series is directed by Jamie Magnus Stone, Doctor Who, £10 Poms, and John Hayes, Dublin Murders. Alexandra Roach, The Light in the Hall, and Joe Cole, Gangs of London, lead a cast which includes a host of Scottish stars such as Alec Ferns, James Cosmo, Daniel Cahill, Sharon Small, Luce Chimemba, Katie Lung, Lee McRae, Sharon Rooney, and Scott Reed. Writer Nick Leather said, "It's a joy to be able to write for this cast of some of the finest acting talent in the UK today. Our train is a real roller coaster, a white-knuckle trip through the heart of Britain, and I'm delighted to have them join us for the ride." Kate Harwood, Managing Director, Euston Films, says, "We are so excited to be carrying this brilliant, eclectic and precious cast on our train, matched by tremendous talent in our security centre in London. It's all aboard as we start shooting Nick's thrilling scripts." Lindsay Salt, Director of BBC Drama, said, "I'm so pleased that Joe, Alexandra and this exceptional ensemble cast have all come aboard Night Sleeper as it speeds through BBC One and iPlayer. Nick Leather has created an adrenaline-fueled thriller like no other, and I can't wait to see it brought to the screen." Produced by Euston Films, Wreck, The Sister, Dublin Murders, Night Sleeper will run in 6 60-minute episodes on BBC One and BBC iPlayer. And that was by Craig Williams. The Herald on the 25th of April and the Arts and Ends section. John Sargent and Peter Davison go on a big steam adventure by Susan Swarbrick. What's the story? The big steam adventure. I'll need more information. Broadcaster John Sargent, actor Peter Davison, and heritage train enthusiast Paul Piglet Middleton, the latter best known for the Yorkshire Steam Railway, all aboard, are set the challenge of travelling from the south of England to Scotland for a new 4-part Channel 5 series. That doesn't sound too hard. There's a twist. They have to do it using only the power of steam. That is a tad trickier. Indeed, the idea is that they utilise everything from paddle boats and barges to cars, trains and traction engines, learning more about the history of engineering genius of the machines that transport them along the way. Plenty of scope for hilarity then. Affirmative. The programme blurb promises all sorts of trials and tribulations en route. The first mode of transportation is the 92-year-old steam tug Challenge, the last working vessel of its kind on the Thames, which played part in the Dunkirk evacuation of 1940. Later in the episode, they hop onto an open-topped 1909 Stanley steamer car, step aboard the Duchess of Sutherland's steam locomotive, and get to grips with Puffing Billy, a steam bus designed to carry a brass band to functions around the country. When can I watch? The Big Steam Adventure begins on Channel 5, Tuesday, 9 p.m. And that was by Susan Swarbrick. The Herald on the 25th of April and the Arts and Ends section. Coronation. The Proclaimers removed from King's playlist by Jody Harrison. The Proclaimers have been removed from an official King's coronation playlist after they were criticised for their anti-royal views, it has been reported. Craig and Charlie Reid's hit, I'm Gonna Be 500 Miles, was due to be featured alongside prominent UK artists. However, the BBC reports the song has been removed by the UK government following complaints. Last year, the Scottish singers signalled their support for a Republican demonstrator who shouted during the proclamation of King Charles. Charlie Reid expressed Republican views in an interview with The National after a man in Oxford was arrested for shouting "Who elected him?" during a proclamation event for King Charles last September. The Proclaimers singer said, "I thought that guy spoke for me, and he speaks for loads of other people. Not just in Scotland, but right around the UK." Simon Hill, who works for the pacifist Peace Pledge Union, was initially charged under the Public Order Act, but his case was later dropped by the Crown Prosecution Service. The playlist features Queen, The Beatles, Tom Jones, David Bowie, Kate Bush, Emily Sandé, and other top UK artists. The Proclaimers have described their song in recognition from the 2007 album Live With You as a representation of our overwhelming contempt for people on the left in this country who snipe against the royal family and end up taking honours. A Department for Digital, Cultural, Media and Sport spokesperson said, "The playlist has been created to celebrate British and Commonwealth artists ahead of the upcoming coronation." The King's coronation will take place on 6 May at Westminster Abbey in London. And that was by Jody Harrison.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels, review, tell your friends about our service.